Welcome to another show of the Research to Reps Roundtable. I'm your co-host, Pat Ivey, and with me is Dr. Ted Lambrinidis. What's going on, Ted?
How's it going, Pat? Looking forward to today's podcast with Ernie.
You know, I'm excited. I'm really excited because you're wearing a hat, and that means it's about time to go to business. It's time to play ball. So without further ado, this guest is a special person in the field of sports science. I'm not going to do the introductions. He is one of the most skillful speakers and presenters I've ever witnessed. So I know he can get that done while we're talking about research to reps. So without further ado, welcome to the show, Dr. Ernie Rimer.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. And before we dive in today, I just want to say thank you to the two of you, Dr. Pat, Dr. Ted. You both have had a tremendously positive influence on me. And that's why it's such a great honor to join the podcast and have a discussion with you today. So thank you very much.
Well, I appreciate you. You have been someone that I have leaned on over the years, and we've had a chance to collaborate before. A few years back. We can even talk about that if you want to get into some of that. But I'm really, really excited. We should probably just go ahead and let the cat out of the bag. Dr. Rimer, you will be joining by the time this podcast is released. So it's not we're not letting it out of the bag too much. But you will be joining the University of Louisville as the first director of sports science. What does that mean? What is that? What is that about? I know what it is, at least my version of it, but what is your version?
Well, my version is pretty simple. I feel like the sports science team is really a group of interdisciplinary hybrids. Truly, sports science is the study of sport, and what you study depends on your goals. Once those goals and those targets are set, the sports science team simply applies the steps of the scientific method to achieving those goals. We may not always fulfill the entire scientific method, but if the sports scientist, as an interdisciplinary hybrid who can cross those disciplinary lines to increase the level of application and innovation going on there, then truly, in my opinion, each step of the scientific method serves as a primary skill for the sports science team. And this is especially true in a large organization with many different teams like a collegiate athletics department.
Now, Ernie, you started the program at Utah. What were some of your biggest challenges to sort of develop that from the ground up?
At that point in time, I was transforming from a strength and conditioning coach to a sports scientist. And I would say the biggest challenges were just defining what sports science is, trying to understand that and how it can operate, learning how to adapt to the system and culture I was in to be able to provide value to different stakeholders in the athletics department.
Ernie, there's a lot of depth to what you just said. Can you go further into and explain maybe some of the steps, maybe give us some tangible examples for someone that may be looking to follow in your footsteps?
When I first got started with this and wanted to make the transition into becoming a sports scientist, I was working at the U.S. Ski and Snowboard Association. And when I was first employed by the USSA, I was employed as a strength and conditioning specialist by the sports science department. And this idea of sports science really opened up my eyes to realize that as a sports scientist, I have certain skill sets and knowledge that I can use to provide greater value to any given sport or a department as a whole that goes beyond the sets and reps in the weight room. And when I made the transition from an Olympic sports organization to a collegiate athletics department, there were many adjustments I had to make, like just diving back into the NCAA rules and regulations, learning how to adapt to each specific sport and coaching staff, as well as each specific department, a support staff department and culture, and learning how to be a chameleon to learn how to speak their language, learn what you can accomplish versus what you may not be able to accomplish. And as that interdisciplinary hybrid, I have become tremendously valuable to various entities in the athletics department. However, if you ask any one of those, they will all give you a different answer about how I have served their area.
Which is interesting because the key to what you sort of just said is communication, correct?
Well, in part, I think Dr. Ivey says it the best. It would be caring, communication, and collaboration. Gotcha. But I think there's some meaning to that. Obviously, you have to care about the needs of others to be successful. I think sometimes sports science, because it's in its infancy in the United States, has developed a bad rap in some circles. And I've gotten to witness that firsthand, and I've listened to my peers. I've heard the stories from the industry. And I think that the critical part is that we as sports scientists are service providers, and we have to truly care about the goals and initiatives of those we're serving. They're in the trenches every single day. They're the ones who are serving the athletes, and they're not always going to have that time to go through that research, inform, and innovative process in order to get better. But if we're listening carefully enough and we care, then we're going to put time and energy into doing that R&D behind the scenes in order to help them achieve their goals. And it's taken me a little time to realize that it's actually not what I think is best. It's actually using the scientific process to help them achieve what they think is best.
That requires checking egos at the door. That requires listening, learning, having a growth mindset, and we could keep going. You said that sports science is in its infancy in the United States, as opposed to where it might be internationally. So can you talk about the contrast between where we are in the United States and maybe why we are there?
Well, you might have to fact check some of my dates, but in the United States, there's been an evolution of specialized support. So I think the athletic trainers became recognized as a profession in the 1950s. And then in the 1970s, the strength and conditioning coaches became recognized as a profession. And I think late 90s, early 2000s, now sports nutrition became recognized. And as each new professional comes into play, we have to recalibrate and restructure the role delegation. And I'm not even sure if sports science is recognized as a profession in the United States yet. There's not even a certification for sports scientists in the United States unless you use one of the foreign opportunities for that. Now, there is going to be a CPSS coming out soon, which will be offered by the National Strength and Conditioning Association, but we're still brand new. Now, the evolution of things, I believe, starts with Australia. In the 1976 Olympics, the Australians won 5 medals, and they were pretty embarrassed by that. In total, that is 1 medal for every maybe 3 million people in their country at that time. So they formed the Australian Institute of Sport, and fast forward to the 2012 Olympic Games, and they went from one medal per every 3 million people roughly to one medal for every 650,000 people. So they had this dramatic improvement in medals per capita. And it wasn't like they had new special athletes. They learned to use sports science to do more with the athletes they had. Around that time, 2012 or 13, I started to track the progress of sports science in the United States. Every year I'd go through and just search the internet and try to identify people who were being named sports scientists. And it was slow. And suddenly there's been an exponential rise in sports scientists in the United States. Like I said, there will soon be a certification. But I think the essence is really about not only identifying and acquiring better athletes, but doing more with the athletes you have. That's what it's about. The United States has been very spoiled with the Olympics just having this natural pipeline of athletes, and the privilege is to be able to pursue sport from a young age. Collegiate athletics is hugely focused on recruiting better athletes and finding that momentum to do that. Professional sports are heavily focused on identifying and acquiring great talent. I think sports science is about learning how to use a scientific process to do more with what you have.
Now, Ernie, for some of the younger listeners out there, when you say the scientific process, go in a little bit more detail about that for somebody that's new to the profession.
For me, when I started to pursue a PhD, I set out for that with a goal to become a better scientist. And even in grad school and everything, no one tells you how to accomplish that goal. It's like you go through a master's degree, then you get a PhD, and automatically you are a good scientist because you have a PhD. And I don't know if that's totally true. So for me, as I'm moving into Utah athletics, creating this sports science entity, learning just how to concisely define sports science, then it's like, well, what is a sports scientist? What is their primary skill set? And what I decided to do was pursue each step of the scientific method as a skill. And even to this day, I'm continually learning how to listen and identify the questions and the goals that people are trying to communicate, and then learning how to conduct background research to find out if answers are already out there. That can include diving into the published literature. That can include reading textbooks, phoning a friend, listening to podcasts, scanning social media for topics. That's background research. And the beautiful thing about the scientific method is, in the applied setting, is if answers are already out there, you can skip all the hard stuff in the middle, meaning designing an experiment, collecting data, analyzing data. That's the hardest part of the scientific method. And if the answers are already out there and they can provide innovations to your team, to your department, you get to skip the hard stuff. At the end of that is the communication of results. And essentially, that's the scientific method. For me personally, I have entered and been pursuing deliberate practice in getting better at each one of those steps as a skill set. So when we talk about scientific processes, that's different than a science experiment, because learning how to identify problems and or ask questions is a part of the scientific method, but it is a scientific process, especially when you start to review the published literature, you start to collect data, you start to analyze that data. All of these things are scientific processes, even if they're short of an entire scientific experiment. But I think what's really fun about applied sports science is when you cross the line from the basic scientific method into applied science. And this is where we start to innovate, to assimilate information and compare that to our operation, and then bring those together and help them collide so that new ways of doing things start to emerge that make your staff more efficient, more effective. You can save time and money, and ultimately the athletes and the sports are the primary benefactors, right?
Yeah, that was really good. That was going to be my question, Ted. So that's a very good breakdown there, Ernie. I was asked the question when we were doing the search for the director of sports science: does the candidate have to have a PhD? And being asked that question by people that don't have a PhD, don't understand the education and what you have to go through, all the research methods classes, the quantitative, qualitative classes, multivariate analysis, all of this that you have to learn just to be able to propose a topic for your dissertation. So when you're describing the scientific method, it's that training that you go through with that, pursuing that doctorate that allows you to be involved in a conversation and then draw on that educational experience you have to be able to formulate questions. Because to know how to ask the question, you have to understand methods. And so it was, I really appreciate the way you answered Ted's question there. The question that I have for you is, for the sport coach that's listening, for the strength and conditioning coach that's listening, that may think we're already doing sports science. We have Catapult GPS, we have Zephyr, we have heart rate monitors, we have these other forms of technology. Why do we need a sports scientist? Because, you know, we've got a graduate student taking care of it. We have a strength and conditioning coach that's chasing down GPS units after practice. Why do we need a sports scientist? I think you answered that, but what is your answer to that question specifically?
Well, just to touch on the technology piece, collecting data is one step of the scientific method. And if all you're doing is collecting data and that's your only scientific process, then likely your sports science operation is insufficient. In my opinion, one of the number one reasons why we need sports scientists is what I alluded to earlier. The coaches are dealing with operations. If they're lucky enough to have operations in their program, then they have people scheduling flights and all of that, but they're in recruiting. They're figuring out the technical and tactical X's and O's. They're really pressed with their responsibilities by the tyranny of the urgent, the things that are right in front of you that demand your time right now. And this is true for the athletic trainers, the dietitians. I mean, for real, no one, unless someone's fasting, people just don't stop eating. Dietitians are always feeding people. They're busy. And the strength and conditioning coach, everyone is extremely busy. They're in the trenches. Every single day, more and more research is being published that could have information that's going to explain how we get better, but they're too busy to look into that. In my mind, the sports scientist is the leg of support to all of those different areas, who can continually research their questions, research better ways for them to achieve their goals, go through these processes, and ultimately learn how to innovate in ways that are going to help us manage our athletes better in terms of performance, health, injury mitigation. And sometimes the goals may not even be related to athlete health and performance. Sometimes the research might even be related to figuring out which zip codes are more likely to purchase season tickets. And the sports scientist is that person who's armed with a scientific skill set to go and attack those goals for people when they just don't have the time to carry out that R&D.
Now, I've got a question for both of you. When you were talking about the different disciplines that go into sports science, and we have the area of sports psychology, but also what's become more prevalent, and obviously with Simone Biles' situation became more to light, and Michael Phelps is, the mental health of the athletes. What other individuals are you bringing into the team of sports science that help? Are you having a sports psychologist and a mental health counselor as part of this team? How are some of the schools or in your program, how are you handling that situation? Because it's becoming much more of a need.
Ted, you're beating me to every question. I don't know what you're doing, but get out of my head. Seriously. I'm going to take the health and performance part of the question, Ernie. If you want to go ahead and break down the different positions, maybe in sports science, we'll tie it all together for Ted. We'll bring it back and tie it all together for you, Ted. So we have a health and performance team, and my position is to oversee that. So the areas and people that I oversee are team physicians, sports medicine, sports performance, sports nutrition, sports science, mental health, and mental performance. And we also work with our dining halls. So that's the health and performance team, and we're meeting constantly. And as you can imagine, over the last year, we had to add a few other people to our health and performance meetings. The housing director, the equipment director, facilities, because of COVID and when you have a positive test and quarantining and things like that, it becomes more broad when you're trying to solve these problems together. So the sports scientist is a part of our health and performance team. Now, within the sports science department, there are some levels and layers to that that Ernie can speak to.
For sure. Thank you, Pat. And so there will definitely be different layers. I mean, for me personally, I kind of consider myself to be a jack of all trades. So I'm not necessarily an expert at anything besides perhaps applied sports science in the athletics organization, but I'm average to above average at just about everything else, but I'm not deeply competent in any one thing. And so with your sports science team, for me personally, it's about having a group of people who are really good at different parts of the process. So at Louisville, I'm grateful that Paul Jones will be a part of the team, and he's an amazing data analyst, amazing at it. He's so much better than I am at it, and I'm going to hang on his skill set for analysis and reporting every single day. And you also need, if you are interested in communication, whether in the visual form or the written form, you need people who are good at that too. There's different people out there who are very good at producing great visualization tools for stakeholders to review and just look at it and go, I get it. There's also people out there who are really good at writing. And so in my mind, the sports science team is really to assemble a group of people who are extremely gifted in different areas of the scientific method. You also need to have your foot soldiers, so to speak. So if the sports scientist time is taken up running a GPS unit all the time, then you're taken away from the work that person could be doing to truly benefit the sport, a support staff area, or the whole department. So aside from having those people who are deeply competent in different areas of the scientific method, you also just need people who can help carry out the mundane work. As soon as the sports scientist fills up their whole day with the mundane tasks, now the sports science team becomes somewhat less valuable to what they were before, because all their time is taken up running a force plate, when I can teach a mathematics student how to run force plates in 2 days and put the entire football team through it like I did over the past few weeks, right? So as soon as the sports scientist time is taken up on those things, then I think they start to provide less value. So it's important to have the support to be able to get things done, but we also need to have deeply competent people who can fulfill the entire scientific method.
So Ted, within those layers of sports science and biomechanics and program coordinating and research and program technology specialist, that will fall within that sports science department underneath the director, that director is sitting at the table of the health and performance team. And around each sport will be a specific health and performance team. So if it's baseball, there's a sports scientist, nutritionist, strength coach, athletic trainer, team physician, mental health and mental performance person around that sport. So around each sport is a health and performance team, along with a director level health and performance team, that the sports scientist sits at each one of those tables. And it may be the same person as we're starting out and as we grow and expand, but eventually you're going to have a team of people that can facilitate these services for each sport.
Thank you for giving me that spot there, Dr. Pat. That's another area I didn't quite touch on. My mind was a little bit elsewhere, but when you think about it, you have a sports nutrition department. So you have domain experts there. You have strength and conditioning. Like, the strength and conditioning coaches know more about strength and conditioning than the sports scientists do. And you have the mental health, you have mental performance, we have sports medicine, and the extended network of physicians and surgeons. But there are a few areas that are somewhat underutilized in the collegiate athletics support staff, and Dr. Pat touched on one of those, which would be the biomechanist. But there are people in this world who are pure bona fide physiologists. And that could be an area that we can kind of tap into, finding someone who has that expertise at a deep level. And there's also people who are really into health promotion and understanding overall health promotion. And we try, and we're getting better, especially with the mental health crew. But health promotion can go further than just the brain. And then I mentioned, Paul, the data collection, analysis, and reporting piece seems to take over on sports science in America, but there are some expertises in there that if we can get a hold of them, we might be able to do a lot of really good work, especially in the collegiate athletic setting, but as well as the Olympic and the professional settings.
With regard to messaging, say to the coach, so you have your health performance team, and you identify an individual who might be having issues with adapting. Maybe you find out this individual has maybe a lot of stress going on in their personal life. So you have your health team. Once you identify the issues that are going on, is there one person, or whoever the specialty is that the person that communicates that information back to the head coach?
That's a good question. And I think that's a tough answer. But in my experience, the hardest messages need to be delivered by people who have the strongest relationship and the greatest amount of trust with the head coach. And if that's not me, then I'm not the person to deliver that message to the head coach today. Sometimes if your mental health professional doesn't have that deep connection with the head coach, who on the support team or that sports performance team is able to get that message across to the coach. Again, it's a team, and at any given time, you have to assign a responsibility or that message to the person on the team who can get it done right now with success.
Good answer.
Ted, I think what we are on the cusp of doing is trying to crack the code of how we can successfully do sports science on a grand scale throughout an entire, not just athletics department, but campus and community and hospital system. I believe that we have gone about this many times in our country in a way that has tried to force sports science or some other areas and make them fit. And I don't know if we've had the success we could have had by the way we have gone about it. So just going and hiring someone and say, oh, they're the sports scientists and they're going to do what they do. Like it requires a little bit more finesse and thoughtful management and communication than that. And I know you have experience with it. I guess, how does that sound to you? Does it sound like it will work? I hope it does.
I think you got the right team members.
Well, I got to say it better work. It better work. You know what I'm talking about. My family and I embraced a very, very diligent process to accept the amazing opportunity that Louisville has offered us. And it's pretty scary. I'm not going to lie. It's scary to make a change in a job when both myself and my wife have been so successful in their workplaces, and we've been here with deep roots for 14 years. So it's scary, and we are getting ready to jump in head first, and we're very, very excited. And Dr. Pat, it better work. And I am going to work very hard to ensure our success. At the same time, I will have to depend on you and all of the other teammates we have who are vested in this process to guarantee success. And essentially, we have to come up with a system that is designed for success. And I think that we are starting to put the pieces in place to accomplish that.
I think when you hear about the way sports science is done, the physiologist is done, that role overseas, and that model was brought to the United States, and there were attempts to implement it similar to how it's done overseas, where the sports scientists, the exercise physiologists are dictating practice schedules and training to the head coach, to the strength and conditioning coach. And that is not where we are at in the United States. We have coaches that are high profile and are significant in our community, significant figures in our community. From a financial standpoint, a lot of resources are poured into our sports. So it doesn't quite work that the person who is who can ask questions and provide answers would be the person that would be dictating what is going on and how it happens. So I'm hoping that this method, this strategy gains traction, and that other people can see, okay, wow, so it can be done successfully. We don't have to hear the stories about, well, they hired a sports scientist and then they fired the sports scientist. And because the sports scientist came in and did what they were told to do. And it just didn't, there's frictions, and there's just different ideologies about how it should be done. So Ernie, what do you think about that and how it's been done probably in the last 5-10 years? And Ted, I know you know the stories as well.
And even worse yet, it can be worse than that. The sports scientists can come in with this attitude that they know more than others. And I've heard war stories where sports scientists have come in, support staff have been fired, and then now the sports scientist moves on or gets fired themselves. And I've heard those stories. I've listened to my peers, and I've even made my own mistakes in my metamorphosis from strength and conditioning coach to sports scientist. And now for me, it's about building the relationship and building the trust. When that's there, you just have to learn how to listen very carefully. Because when you're having those conversations with your peers, eventually they're going to let you know what they want, even if they don't know they're letting you know. And if you can pick up on that and just take a little time to focus in on that and put your magnifying glass on that scenario for a little bit longer, then you can go, hey, Dr. Pat, do you remember when you said this? Well, I've been paying closer attention, and maybe we could do it this way. What I've learned and what my friends at Utah like to tell me is that it's important to plant the seed of a new idea and a new innovation as early as possible, because it can take 2 to 3 years for them to kind of think on that. But sometimes you can't unthink an idea once it's out there. And then eventually they're looking at it and they're thinking about it. And what I've discovered over and over, because I've had enough longevity at Utah, is that eventually they come around, and then they will come to you with the same idea. And it's not like it was their idea. They'll acknowledge it might be yours, and sometimes they will have forgotten. But once that idea is there, time goes by and we can implement and we can innovate. So it takes strong relationships, a lot of trust, an immense amount of respect and recognition that if I am the expert strength and conditioning coach, then I should be a strength and conditioning coach. If I am the expert athletic trainer, then I should be an athletic trainer. And I'm none of those things. So I have to have the utmost amount of respect and willingness to learn from the expertise of my peers so that they can bring me up to speed on things so that now I can benefit them. And then you just have to have an immense amount of patience, so much so that even if certain doors are closed, certain opportunities are closed to you, don't worry about it. Don't lose sleep over it. There is so much work that needs to be done, and there are people who are interested in working with the sports science team now. You can put your energy there while maintaining strong relationships and building greater and greater trust and learning more and more about others' goals and needs. And eventually they're going to come around. And that's through 8 years in the making. These are some powerful lessons that I've learned.
Now, Ernie, what we've talked about, connecting with coaches and making sure that this is athletic department wide. What recommendations do you have in terms of selling this to the individual athletes at a school?
I think that again comes down to your teammates in the system the athletes have greater trust in. So whoever those individuals are, once they believe in you, the sports scientist, be vulnerable to those individuals to help them, to ask them to help share your message to the athletes. For example, with Utah football, Doug Alisaya has been one of my greatest allies in educating the athletes. He gets to go in and do roll call before every single strength session. And if I just show up to that strength conditioning staff meeting, he'll turn to me and say, Ernie, is there anything you'd like me to share? And I'll say, hey, I need to get more buy-in on this. And Doug will announce that and express in his own point of view why it's important at every single roll call for 3 weeks. And that message will be heard. But the other part is we've been talking a lot about how the sports scientist interfaces with staff through this conversation so far. I have very strong relationships with athletes, very strong. And you just have to be organic about that, not try to force it. For me, the scenes and the settings are different where I get to build those relationships with athletes. But if it just starts out with having a conversation, when they say your name, you turn, you look at them, you stop what you're doing, you really engage the athlete, and you just get to know them first. A lot of times I get to know the athlete, their partners. Some of our athletes have kids, their kids' names, their brothers and sisters' names, understand where they're from and what they're doing. All of that's established a lot of time before that athlete will go, hey, can you help me map out a schedule that matches my class, my academic demands, and my sport participation activities in order to maximize my readiness and my recovery to get the most out of this. Sometimes it takes that, but I think and what I've learned from Dr. Raverino, our director of psychology and wellness, is that it's just really important to just stop what you're doing and be willing to engage the athletes, because they do want to engage with you. But if you're always so frantic and busy and trying to get things done, you're going to miss that opportunity every time they look at you and just want to have a chat. And that process has helped me build really strong bridges and connections with athletes, to such an extent that at times athletes are willing to write like a recommendation for this research project or something. Like I've been able to recruit athletes to give just their take on how I've helped them in order to achieve something I'm trying to achieve. And it's been pretty cool.
Ernie, we've talked a lot about the past. We've talked about the present. What about the future of sports science? Where is it going in your eyes? Where can it go? Where would you like to see it go?
Well, the future is that I think the profession is going to blow up, and that's because there is a certification that's going to be offered. And in the spring of 2018, the NSCAA brought out 20 people from around the country to understand what the sports science role looks like in the United States and to define the scope of practice for the sports scientists. When this thing releases, it's a lot of people are going to work for that certification and are going to work to become a sports scientist. And for me personally, I embrace the domain expert sports scientists that are out there. There's a lot of them, and a lot of them are in academia more so than in applied athletics. But where I really hope to see sports science go is to establish these interdisciplinary and these collaborative teams who can just tear down the disciplinary silos, tear down those walls, and people can truly work together to focus on the needs of their athletes and the sports and the organizations they're serving. I hope that the sports scientists will become someone who is integral to the overall sport performance team, because they are people who operate behind the scenes and make everyone around them better at what they do, because those teammates are willing to seek that support from the sports scientist. In order for us to get there, there's going to be a lot of things that we as professionals are going to have to learn. One of them will be humility, just understanding that we actually don't know anything. And the whole reason why we have science is so that we can learn more. So we have to learn to be humble about our knowledge and our skills, because as soon as you think you've arrived, there's someone out there who knows a lot more than you do. The other piece will be, and that goes for the sports scientists, it also goes for the sports staff. But as professionals, we will have to learn how to become more vulnerable to our weaknesses and what we just simply don't know how to do, what we simply can't do. Because as soon as we're willing to be vulnerable with each other, I think most people in their good nature want to help others. And until you show that vulnerability, those opportunities for support from others won't be there. And lastly, I think that we have to learn to show more gratitude for the people who raise us up and give us opportunities to be successful. Because once we establish these things as a whole profession of sports performance and coaching, when we can learn to set those egos aside and just know that we have really strong teammates beside us who can work together to do more than the individual is capable of, I'm really excited to see where sports science goes, applied sports performance as a whole goes in the United States.
You know, with a quick question for both you and Pat, with the name, image, and likeness, have any athletes asked to have their data so they can monetize off their data?
Wow, Ted, that's a big one. NIL is big. We don't know where I think, just like we're talking about sports science is in everything that we do, NIL is going to be in everything that we do. Soon as that, before that athlete ever arrives on our campuses, and after they leave our campuses, NIL is going to be impacting those athletes and coaches, staff, in our athletics department. So what is their data? What do they own? When I'm hearing conversations about people being able to own highlights and the digital versions of their pictures and artwork, where does it end? If they ran 21 miles an hour on a field, do they own that? They did it. Who owns it? Who owns the video of the touchdown catch? Is it the network? Is the athlete's name, image, and likeness? Is it the school? There are so many questions that we have no idea how big NIL is. So if you can ask the question about NIL, then it's going to be a thing. If you say, hey, can I own my own data? It's going to be something that gets discussed and has to get figured out. What do you think, Ernie?
It's a great question, and I'm sure that is coming up more and more at the professional ranks, and it's going to emerge right in to the collegiate ranks. To me, a big part about name, image, and likeness is that it becomes another goal or another opportunity for the athlete with which we have to support our job as an athletics department or an organization is to help the athletes be successful for reasons related to their personal lives, but also reasons related to the organization. So name, image, and likeness to me is just going to be this whole other area of support that we are going to have to help the athletes fulfill. And I wish I had a crystal ball, or I wish I could recruit Paul and some other great analysts out there to just drop everything we think we know about name, image, and likeness into a machine learning algorithm and predict what's going to happen in the future. But this is going to be a very interesting, intriguing next few years with collegiate athletics.
I will say this. I've already heard of athletes that are at other schools that are not going to participate in certain team events that they used to go to sign autographs for the season posters, and they're saying they're not going to show up unless they're getting paid for it. So here we go.
Yeah.
We need to be, we're going to have to be more proactive. The leadership is going to have to be more proactive to get caught in a situation where all of a sudden you have it scheduled and you let the public know that there's going to be an autograph signing, and then your athletes say, no, we're not signing autographs unless we're paid. We're going to have to be more proactive. We can't just go about what we've done in the past. We're going to have special counsel of athletes that we're communicating with, and we're receiving their input and feedback, and we're bouncing ideas off of them. We have to see them more as partners, less like employees, even though maybe that's the wrong term. Maybe we need to stop acting like we're the ones in charge and start thinking more that we're partners with our athletes, and we have jobs, we have roles and responsibilities as supervisors and leaders. They have responsibilities, roles as student athletes. We have to work together. But the days of you do what I said because I'm the one in charge, that's not going to fly like it used to.
Well said.
That was a tough one, Ted.
Yeah. Well, Ernie, we always ask our special guest some reading recommendations for our listeners. So, and it doesn't necessarily have to be related to sports science. Any books that you've read do you think would be of value to our listeners?
I appreciate that. And, you know, one thing I haven't been able to share in this conversation is my purpose. And for me, it's my purpose to live an extraordinary life and career by helping others find greater happiness and fulfillment in their lives, vocations, and careers. So once again, I want to thank both of you for the opportunity today, and thank the audience for an opportunity for me to fulfill my purpose today. But I was specific about lives, vocations, and careers. And I think of that about life. I think about that in hobbies, and I think about that as a career, which sometimes can be a hobby. So for me personally, on a personal note, I like fiction. So probably one of my favorite series would be The Hunger Games. Katniss is a total badass. I love fiction because I think it increases our creativity and just kind of opens up our mind and gets us outside of our own box. I encourage everyone to pursue a hobby. It's a hobby. You're not supposed to be that great at it unless it's also your job. But I hope that most people's, if someone's hobby is their job, I hope that they will find other hobbies, because life is just so much more rich when you have hobbies. So I recommend that you go and get a book on tree houses or something else that might pique your interest. And lately, I haven't been, when it comes to career, I haven't been reading on the technical side. I've been reading more on the leadership side. So I have picked up Good to Great again. And if you ever see yourself being a leader in any way, I would encourage that you read this. But I also like to read books that are gifted to me by the actual authors. So this book here, The Captain Class by Sam Walker, he presented at a conference and did a book signing. And I ask all authors to do something for me when they sign a book cover. I asked them to sum the book up into one sentence. And Sam writes, "We don't understand what great leaders are really like and what they actually do." So that's the essence of this book here. And Christy Ashwanden came to campus and did a collaborative talk between athletics and some of our academic departments. And what she wrote was, train hard and then take a nap and get a good night's sleep and maybe even have a beer. Dr. Nicholas Pierce wrote the book called The Purpose Path. And on his cover, he said, "Ernie, embrace the journey, but don't use autopilot." And this book has had a tremendous influence on me and helping to shape my purpose to live an extraordinary life and career. And extraordinary means that we're not living the same year, 20 years in a row, but it's full of excitement and challenge. And quite frankly, roller coasters of success and adversity throughout your entire life and learning how to deal with that. Our head volleyball coach, Beth Lanier, just published a book over the pandemic called Stop Competing and Start Winning. And this book is probably one of the greatest honors I've had in my career because she mentions us by name and she talks about what we did. And on the cover, she said, "The VPT is a foundation of success of Utah volleyball." And then she adds another sentence and writes, "Thanks for all you do to help Utah volleyball be designed to win." And I think that's really the essence is learning how to enjoy life, design your life in a way that it's awesome. And that's what I'd like to share with this audience. But, you know, there's someone else on this call who's published a book. And, you know, I'm hoping that I might get a signed cover with a single sentence that explains the essence of that book.
Yeah.
Throwing that out there.
Yeah, Ted. No, that was really good. Appreciate it. Dr. Rimer, it's been really good. I noticed that you're wearing the AC/DC shirt, but that's for another show. That's for another podcast. That's the Beyond Sets and Reps podcast when we learn about Dr. Ernie Rimer and who he is. We kind of did it in a different order. We learned more about what you do, how you do, maybe why you do it. But we'll have you on. We'll have you on and we'll talk about it. Ted, once again, appreciate you. Thank you for your time, your contributions to this podcast. Your book, Ted, and T-shirt are in the mail on the way. I just put it in the post office today. Ernie, yours is here only when you get here. That way I know for sure this real. So,
well, look, I appreciate that. That's like, I guess that's the signing bonus, right? A signed copy from Dr. Pat Ivey, the man, the myth, the legend. But you guys are awesome. And if I could just share, maybe it's inappropriate, but man, life has been moving really fast lately so that we can get out there. We're coming. And when we get there, I hope you're ready. I'll be ready. We got a lot of great stuff to do.
I'm ready, Ted. Cincinnati's not that far.
That's right. I look forward to visiting you both.
Yep.
And right. Dr. Ted, I'll have you know that I've already tasked employees within the U of L athletic system to identify the date for the annual sports performance barbecue. You see, every year,
okay,
barbecue, and we invite everyone from the state of Utah. but this barbecue is happening sometime in 2021. And because things are so close together, we're not just going to invite everyone from the state of Kentucky. We're going to invite everyone from the nearby adjacent states, and you'll be one of the first interstate person to get that invitation.
I appreciate that.
Dr. Rimer, where can our listeners find you?
Mm-hmm. I am active on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. And all three of those, the handle is Ernie Rimer. And if it's really important, you can look me up on different athletics websites. I usually list my personal phone number, so feel free to just reach out about anything. Send me a text so that I know you're not a robot, and we'll dive in and talk shop about anything any of the audience wants to discuss.
All right, that's a wrap. Appreciate your time. Thank you, Ted. Thank you, Ernie. You all have a great day.
Thank you,
You
guys.
too, the same. Enjoyed it.
It's been a pleasure
Take
and
care.
an honor.